Welcome to Civil Dissent. These podcasts are about you. Ticia and Ron are speaking as citizen activists responding to the explosive conditions of our times that affect us all. In the spirit of the fairness doctrine, we will air conflicting views and you will determine what is valid. We will provide you with leads and contacts to government, business, community organizations, and more. And you take the action. In democracy, information and participation are key. Use your key, your voice, for a better world. Ticia and Dr. Ron have each traveled to more than a dozen countries and have studied political science, anthropology, and communications. Ron has even tried the undercooked mutton at the Canadian Pavilion at Epcot Center. We differ on our views, but we agree that our friendship is more than important than our differences. We hope you feel the same. Now, without further ado, whatever that means, Ticia and Ron on Civil Dissent.
Well, hello again, everyone, and we want to reintroduce Civil Dissent as we go on our merry and hopefully provocative way on our podcast. I'm Ron Ian Haben, and I'm sitting with my friend Ticia Bauza, and we always begin by doing a little check-in to look behind the curtain and kind of see what excites us personally before we get into the topic of the day. So, Ticia, what caught your attention this week?
Well, I have to say I did respond to the Barbie phenomena because I spoke to someone who told me that he's out of state, but he said there are women who are like in their 80s walking around pink thinking Barbie. So I went to see the film, and I have to tell you, I think it's a very fun spoof both on men and women. And I think it makes some interesting comments about the strategies that men use and the strategies that women use in their relationships. Also, I have to tell you, I think Mattel had a lot of guts to give the okay for this film because it's very imaginative. It's very, how shall I say, very striking in its set designs. Everything about it is sort of experimental, which I frankly like. But I understand also that you saw a film that had to do with experiments.
Yes, we're each going to talk about the mega film of the summer. I saw Oppenheimer, and I guess I have the advantage of not doing a spoiler alert because it's history, and there's a great book on him, and we all kind of know the story. Having said that, it does present a very interesting moral dilemma. We have a genius scientist who was brought in to create the ultimate weapon to defeat the Nazis during World War II, and that was ultimately the atomic bomb. And they set up an entire city in the middle of desert New Mexico, and it was very, very hush-hush for a long time with a huge team of scientists in New Mexico, with others being in Tennessee. And everything's going along fine. There's a good chance that his theories are going to work. And then the fun really begins, or the investigation of the viewer really begins, because here is the dilemma. They've now created something that is the weapon of mass destruction. Now humanity can destroy itself. And how does one feel about the, quote, success of the atomic bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? That is really an imbroglio that would trap him perhaps for the rest of his life. And just to add insult to injury, members of the U.S. Congress went after him and stripped him of his security clearance during the McCarthy era. So he was kicked to the curb after this war-winning invention. And it's up to you, the viewer, to decide, well, was it worth it or not? But let's not kid ourselves. It's the harbinger of what we have today, the weapons of mass destruction, and I could see why any scientist or any human being might have some trouble sleeping at night. So it's a must-see. I don't know how the mass culture decided on Barbie and Oppenheimer. In some cases, it's a double header for you. But I have to be convinced by Tisha to see Barbie, and we'll leave it at that. But Tisha, would you like to talk about what we're going to talk about today? And it's one of three, is it not?
Yes, but before we get into that, I'd like to say the following, that despite the fact that I'm happy that we won the war, I think in many respects it was almost a racist act, the dropping of this bomb. And I say that for more than one reason. Among the reasons being, they keep talking about the desert area that this town was created in, but in fact, they were native lands. And Oppenheimer himself, I think, wanted the lands returned back to the Indians. I'm not sure that quite happened. Moreover, it seems that since then, the surrounding area, there are people that continued for generations to suffer radiation effects from the testing of the bombs. And certainly, they have not been acknowledged or received reparations of any kind. And I think that would have been an important thing at some point to weave in to the story in some way. If not on the film itself, it was suggested that perhaps there should have been panels after the film, as the film was being released, in order to bring attention to those points. As far as what we're going to be discussing, which we're going to do in three parts, it's the environment, and interestingly enough, I think there's no way to minimize the impact of the bomb and the war and munitions on the environment, separate and apart from all of the other issues having to do with fossil fuels, et cetera, et cetera. It's ridiculous how we carry on about fossil fuels, but we're not carrying on about all of the munitions and explosives that are occurring in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, and the fact that Russia, has us in peril because apparently explosives have been found now around the nuclear power plant that they have taken possession of.
Well, I can begin the segment on land with some surprisingly good news. And the good news of the day is, as we are recording this, 24 hours ago, young activists had taken the state of Montana to court. And it seems that there was a project that the state wanted to proceed on, which would involve more fossil fuel development, and of all the fossil fuels we know. And so a group of young activists took them to court saying that we think, going forward, that environmental repercussions and sensitivities must be included in any go-ahead that the state may further issue. And so environmental responsibility and impact should now be part of every decision made in Montana and, frankly, other states, because this is an example that young people can understand, activists can understand, that the government, the society, the judiciary, the man does respond to citizen action. And that, to me, is a part of what this program is about. And it shows a great success that they stood up to a vast lobby of fossil fuel people in the state of Montana. And so that, to me, is very good news, and we'll begin with that. But I think we both can agree that nationwide and worldwide we haven't done nearly enough to protect the land. We've seen forests deforested for development. We've seen cities that could use a lot more green space and a little bit less concrete, and I'm thinking of Joni Mitchell's song of they tore down trees and they put up a parking lot, and I think that goes without saying around the country. To help us with the pollution problem and the global warming that we are now daily experiencing around the United States, more trees, more plants, more grass. Flora is an easier answer to, it's the easiest answer to contribute to, again, cleaning our air as it should be, because otherwise the planet appears to be slowly dying, and unfortunately we're seeing every newscast these days virtually beginning with a story on environmental devastation.
Despite the fact that I can agree with some of the points you've brought up, and I'm actually glad that these kids won their case, I do have some concern that there's maybe some unintended consequences to it that they may not have researched or considered sufficiently, which is if you're protesting against, for example, pipelines being put down, you have to consider that if the fuel is still being used and then has to be either trucked or transported by train, both those methods of transporting the fuel is far more dangerous than the pipeline because of the number of accidents that are recorded. Trains alone, and this is according to Budovich, Secretary of Transportation, they can have as many as 1,000 train accidents a year, many of which don't necessarily make the news. But I think you increase the you can inadvertently increase the danger of pollution. As far as fauna, I agree with you. I think it would make a lot more sense, rather than spend the money which is being spent on the developing of artificial leaves to carbon capture. It would make much more sense to employ people to plant trees, to care for trees. And this goes for China as well. If China is going to be building, coal plant after coal plant, for God's sakes, they should, especially since they need to find employment for their people, employ them to plant some trees, which would make a whole lot of sense given the amount of land that they have, the amount of people that they have, and the need that the earth has for more fauna. Not only that, but when you look back, and I remember meeting Isaac Asimov at one point, and way back then, there was information which he included in one of his books that you really actually only, and he researched these things, actually only need to change about 3% of a planet to terraform. Okay? Well, if that's the case, there should be no reason why we can't improve 3% of our planet and the fauna on it to take care and clean up the air, rather than spending tons of citizens' money on experimental programs that may or may not go well, and creating artificial leaves to carbon capture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, the lawsuit to which I refer didn't speak to either transportation or pipes.
That's its problem.
No, it's not a problem at all, because what it says is in every decision going forward, an environmental component must be a part of any decision, which that alone has been opposed and called ridiculous by the fossil fuel industries of Montana. So I think if you get that component into judicial decisions, not only in Montana, but throughout the country, you've done a great deal. And as to the way to do that, those are local decisions. I mean, we could talk about the best way to move fuel. I myself think it's more than long enough time to wean ourselves away from fossil fuels to begin with. I know in Montana you would think that wind power would be abundant, and of course solar power would be abundant. But that's a local issue, and if they want to use a train or whatever they want to use, then that's up to them. But the new component in the law is very exciting, and it's unfortunate that their attorney general is going to appeal, and apparently this could well end up in the Supreme Court. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, what we're going to do is take a little bit of a break and take a few breaths on our own.
And then I will respond.
Okay, if you must. And no, I think that's absolutely fine. But we'll take a break, and we will be right back with even more Civil Dissent. We are back with Civil Dissent, and remember, our website is civildissent.com, and we look forward to you going there for information, references, and so very much more. And thank you again for listening. We had a contest. We have not forgotten you. We've had a contest about the best quotes that you could offer to the program, and we have two outstanding winners, and we will announce them right now. One of the comments is from Linda Swank, and it says as follows: "It was impossible to get a conversation going because everybody was talking too much." And who might that have been? I think most of us probably could guess from here. It was from the great American philosopher Larry Yogi Berra of the New York Yankees. And we have a second very good one by Jenny Long, and she says as follows: "As I recall, the oath taken by the president is to preserve and protect the United States of America." And we thank you for those. I recall saying that very thing in discussing the Ukraine war and President Biden's commitment. But these are terrific quotes, and you will be getting prizes of gift cards very, very soon, and we thank you for this. And this went so well, we may well do it again. We love your quotes. You are very interested and enthusiastic, and we say keep them coming, and thank you so very much. Tisha?
Well, now just to respond to some of the things that you said earlier, I'm happy, as I said before, that these teenagers won their case, but I think that I'm happy that it's being appealed only because I think it should take into account perhaps unintended consequences, as I said, and that it should be a little bit more specific in terms of what makes sense to put regulations on or not put regulations on. So that's where I stand, though definitely I think the earth has to be better taken care of. On the other hand, I have to tell you, sometimes I wonder if this isn't like a magician's trick where the public is being distracted with all of these issues about methane and carbon, etc., and they're being associated with climate change, and they do play a part in climate change, and I don't think that should be denied. However, I'm to some extent somewhat more concerned that this may be a distraction from the fact that the Earth's magnetic field is being affected, that the tilt of the Earth is being affected, and that's something that we don't definitely have any control over. And I'm beginning to wonder if some of these things that they have us focusing on are simply just a distraction in many cases. Not that they don't need to be addressed, but that the other things are frankly much more serious and much more out of control.
Well, I've not heard the Earth tilt information yet. Although from time to time I have experienced a little bit of dizziness, and I'll have to look into that. However, we do have a very serious worldwide pollution problem. The number one factor is coal, and we've been doing that since the Industrial Revolution, and started in England. But we are now transitioning rather quickly to other forms of energy. And also, underneath it all, I think more worldwide respect for our home planet. And that's as it should be. And there are some who say, well, China's not doing anything to reform. Why should we? Well, I think that each of the countries can and should do their part. If China is laggard, that's on them, and there's not much we can do about it. But we have all seen that places like Beijing and some of the other major cities of China have terrible pollution problems, and they were the first to be wearing masks. And I remember they stopped all vehicular traffic in China a month or 6 weeks before they hosted the Olympics, so that the athletes could actually breathe while they were competing. And so they are aware of it. And in fairness, they are right now the world leader in wind turbines. They've made great strides on solar. However, yes, Tisha has a very good point. They are continuing to explore coal and put that in their economy. But it doesn't mean that we should in any way continue that. I know it's not easy, because in the United States we do have some coal-dependent states. West Virginia comes to mind. Kentucky is another. Tennessee. We understand that there are jobs there. But you know what I also learned, unfortunately? Black lung is far worse today than it has ever been. And not only that, but it itself is mutated into a much more serious respiratory situation where by the time miners get to the doctor, it is often too late to save them. And so it's the harshest, most difficult, punishing work environment, and coal miners' lives are truncated as a result of the work they do, and it's getting worse, not better. So for one and all, and every human being on this planet is in it together, we have got to clean up our air, we've got to take care of our land, and have respect for the land. The land itself is alive. This is a planet which is alive, and we are cohabitants of it. We are here temporarily, and if we don't take care of our own business, by the way, the Earth is going to be here. The planet is going to be fine. It's corpuscular life, it's hominids that are going away, and I think that's a rather heavy price to pay for pollution.
Well, there's a lot of merit in what you're saying, but what really strikes me is how tone deaf really the politicians are, and local communities are, or governments are. And I say that because here we sit in Florida with huge parking lots, when in fact, what they could do is they could put solar panels, in the parking lots, and the cars park under them. And this has been done in a limited sense in other countries. The point is that there's a lot of solar power that can be captured and that can even be used that they knew 40 years ago, for God's sakes, for example, about the idea of carbon credits. I say that because organizations which is now known as Landmark Education, which executives used to go to years ago, this was all being discussed, but none of it was implemented, the same way that they're not necessarily implementing the solar panels. Now, I do have issues, however, with the solar panels, because in order to produce them, you have to use sand. And guess what? There's beginning a shortage on sand. And why is that? That is because you also need sand to make concrete. And unfortunately, we're still building massive buildings with concrete. And the Chinese, again, are among the ones that are putting up essentially ghost cities of concrete, which nobody can afford to live in and which are empty and have used up mass quantities of resources that really could have been far better used.
We do have to make very difficult choices, and we have to be knowledgeable about the pros and cons of each of our decisions. The idea that solar is a major component of cleaning our air is indisputable. And we could probably use more efficient silicon wafers as time goes on and science develops. But right now, and we should pay attention to the sand that we're using, and that's a good point. But right now, we are in a dire emergency, and there's not one country, some are better than others, that is meeting their responsibilities on the Paris Environmental Treaty of a few years ago. And so we all have to get our houses in order. There's no doubt we're using too much concrete, Florida being a prime example. And all you have to do is follow the money, guess what, and guess which way the politicians in our state capital and yours are voting. The money and the lobbyists are with the developers, not so much the environmentalists and the scientific community. And so very often when there's a battle between development and environmental responsibilities, guess who wins, especially, or at least we know knowingly, in the state of Florida. And this used to be such a pristine, beautiful place. Now we have to compete with buildings, parking lots, and all sorts of pollution. But unfortunately, we are coming to near the end of our time together for this broadcast. But I want to say that I really do appreciate Tisha's sensitivity to the idea of sand and to the idea of cleaning our air. And she is really good about weighing the positives and negatives about each of these decisions. They certainly exist, and let us hope and pray that the decisions about our land and environment are made by wise, authoritative, and sensitive politicians and captains of industry in the future, so we can live a long and productive and healthful life.
Well, needless to say, I'm glad that on a number of things that we agree, but I have to say the implementation of this administration of solutions is not necessarily what we agree on at all, unfortunately. Despite how I feel about you personally, which is I adore you, but nonetheless, I mean, look, you have got Belgium that has created roads that electrify cars. And again, going back even decades, they know that friction creates energy. And there's no reason why roads cannot be supplied with wiring that will capture energy that then can be transferred to the cars, especially if what you're really looking to do is have electric cars. Now, the other thing is this push for the electric cars. Right now, when the batteries are not reliable, they can start fires that can barely be put out. You still have a barge that was carrying electric cars that, they're wondering why it might have caught fire. Okay, you have electric cars that have found themselves, again, catching fire because they've been in areas where major catastrophes have occurred and they were not equipped, the batteries were not equipped to survive these catastrophes. So I'm not sure that what's being focused on, Ronnie, is really what needs to be focused on. But nonetheless, I'm happy that we both have a respect for this planet and that you have such compassion. My compassion is clearly the animals have done no harm, and yet they are probably suffering the most, at our hands.
Well, thank you for that. And there are those who would blame cows for some of the methane, but that's for an entirely different show and perhaps not for a family audience. I'm not certain.
Not only that, but I don't see how you can blame cows when for over 100 million years you had dinosaurs farting. Don't tell me that a few cows today are causing any kind of problem by comparisons. Yeah, dinosaurs for 100 million years. I don't care what size they were, the big size, the middle size, or the small size. After 100 million years, believe me, if methane was going to do damage, it would have been over that 100 million years at some point. And yet, what history shows is that the planet and its life forms and its fauna were never healthier, for God's sakes.
Well, you're talking about dinosaurs and their expulsion. I told you, ladies and gentlemen, that my good partner is conservative, but that becomes ridiculous. Making
no, it's just scientific knowledge. They just don't want to talk about it because it doesn't play into their line.
Radical lib.
Yeah, they just don't. You just don't want to talk about the obvious. You want people not to even think about it.
Eating less meat would begin to help our earth. And that's another discussion because the amount of acreage needed for animal life to support a meat-eating habit. And I think we're trying to say goodbye, and so we're going to have to leave you hanging till the next show. But I would, again, encourage you to visit our website at civildissent.com. And I think if you'd really like to support us, the best way is please do so through Patreon. And we have a few people to thank. And I think we have to start out with the studios here in Winter Park, the Castle Door Studios, which, of course, everyone knows in Winter Park are exceptional, welcoming, and some would even say the Abbey Road of the USA.
I concur. We agree.
We're ending with an agreeable note, and we are friends. And may I invite you out for a café con leche?
Thank you so much. I'd love it.
And on we go. And so we like to believe this is how it's done. Thank you for listening, and we're going to see you next time on Civil Dissent. Thank you for listening to Civil Dissent. If you agreed with a view you've heard today, or if you have thoughts of your own, go to our website, civildissent.com, to find references where you can make a real difference. Take action, and see you next time on Civil Dissent.